I'd like to welcome everybody to the July 24th, 2019 meeting of the Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Commission. For us, we have a pretty relatively short agenda. I don't think it's midnight this time. So we have a couple of items to go through first, and then we'll get to our first agenda item. So we'll start with the minutes from the June 24th meeting. Has everybody had an opportunity to review those? Any suggested changes or edits?
I had a question about the minutes. So we don't get our conversations recorded anymore? We just have to remember what we said or watch the video?
It links to the video now, yeah.
Okay.
Just like how City Commission does their minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll have the action and recommendation written out, but it links to the minutes of where you talked about it
Okay.
for each item.
Has the City or County Commission had any issues with that, having to kind of go to that extra step to get?
Not so far.
Okay.
The City Commission has done it for quite a while now.
Okay.
Even prior to iCompass.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other comments or suggested changes? Seeing none, do I have a motion?
Move to approve.
I have a second.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Struckoff, seconded by Commissioner Sinclair. All those in favor of approving the minutes? That's 8-0. Okay. Are there any committee reports from are any of us on any committees that meet?
MPO, we haven't met a couple months.
Okay. Are there any new written communications from the public that weren't in the agenda packet? Well, there was one up here on our podium. Okay.
We did have one that came in this afternoon, or excuse me, this evening as the meeting was starting. There's not enough copies for everybody, so we tried to space them in between you, but it's one that's been paid for, one that's available. We will also put that towards the packet as everything goes on.
All right, thank you. Any written communications from staff, planning commissioners, or other commissioners? No? Any written action of waiver requests or determinations made by the city engineer?
None to report.
At this time, I'd ask each of the commissioners to disclose any ex parte communications they may have had on any of the items, identify which item and who you talked to. I guess maybe I'm the only one. On item, what's the number? Item number 3, I received a phone call from Colby Wilson, who's now the departed CEO for the Boys and Girls Club, about the rezoning of the property on Haskell. And I also received a phone call from David Frere, who's a property owner next to that, who submitted a letter, which is essentially what he talked about. And the conversation with the CEO of Boys and Girls Club was basically he was referred to me by the mayor so I could explain conditional zoning to him. So, okay. Any declarations of abstentions from the specific agenda items by any commissioner? I don't see any. This time, we open the floor to general public comment. We haven't had that happen yet, but any member of the public that wants to speak on anything related to land use or any of the land use plans or other items that would come before this commission is free to come up and have 3 minutes to say what you want. Just ask that you address those comments to the commission, and we could refer those to staff for any follow-up if necessary. Oh, I thought we had one. All right, seeing none, we'll go on to agenda item number 1, which is to consider a preliminary development plan for Miracon Plaza.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Sandy Day. This item is a preliminary development plan that you're considering, and this was actually something that was originally developed or rezoned under the old code. So you were seeing a preliminary development plan. There will eventually be a final development plan that will come forward for this project as well. The property is located. We're all ready to go. Okay. The property is located on the northeast corner of Wakarusa Drive and Clinton Parkway. It includes a number of three platted lots within this property on the immediate corner. Some of the background to this project was that it was originally zoned in the late 1990s. You earlier this year considered a rezoning that amended the land uses within the project without amending the development plan at that time. The applicant did provide a concept plan, so some of this may be somewhat familiar to you. This project is in response to those changes of use that specifically added a residential component to the project. This property is part of an existing commercial node at the intersection. It is surrounded by residential uses to the east and to the south, and then additional commercial uses to across the street and to the south. Some of the surrounding land uses include the residential that is both multifamily and detached dwelling. The water treatment plant and fire station, car wash, and another commercial use are located immediately across of Wakarusa Drive, the convenience store to the catty corner, and then multi-dwelling further to the south. This just gives you that perspective of where this property is in location to existing development within the area. One of the significant issues with this project has been how it relates to the existing landscaping. Residents on the east side have expressed a significant concern about maintaining as much of that natural vegetation as possible, and this project has been designed to specifically address that and maintain as much of the vegetation as possible with the project. There are improvements to be made. There is infrastructure that will be constructed with this project, so there will be land disturbance that goes on with the project. It is confined and limited to specific areas within the project, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. This is just a view of what that looks like from Wakarusa Drive today. Another exhibit that shows the subject property, how it relates from the aerial view and how it looks with the project. On the right-hand side, the area that's highlighted in light green is part of that existing vegetation that would be retained. But you can see where the grading occurs on this southern end and along Clinton Parkway where there will be some land disturbance. One of the issues that I talked with the applicant about was providing a cross-section that showed where that landscaping is on that eastern side. This is also part of a drainage easement that goes through and around that property. This would be the proposed development, Wakarusa Drive, and then in the far east end would be the residence. So where we have land disturbance, new vegetation would be added with this project. The preliminary development plan includes 3 separate lots. Each of those includes surface parking that goes with it. Lots 1 and 2 include a little bit excess parking. Lot 3 has not quite as much parking to support its use independently, but as a cohesive development, that shared parking through the development meets that required demand for the mix of uses that is proposed with this project. Lot 1 includes the residential component. Both of these buildings are 2-story, and then the pad site building is a single-story use. The original project included a gas convenience store, and that is here on the right, and how that kind of lays out with the proposed use, which includes this mixed-use tenant building. Residential uses would be accessible from the back side on that 2nd story, and then it's also designed to accommodate an end use that could be a fast order food, a coffee shop, dry cleaners, some kind of use that may or may not have a drive-through with it. One of the things that we talked about during the review phase was about the off-street parking and how we calculate that, because we don't know the exact tenant mix. Depending on how you break out those numbers, that parking can change a little bit one way or another. The applicant's example is what you're seeing in here in this exhibit. Staff's report calculated it a little bit differently, and we came up with a slightly different number. The point being, we believe that there is adequate parking for this use, for this development, without having a substantial amount of excess parking. There's also quite a bit of the site that is retained in green space and open space, so that the need to mitigate for excess parking, we did not demand of this project. Staff's recommendation is for approval, and there were no conditions associated with this project as proposed. Happy to answer any questions, and I know the applicant is here as well.
Thank you, Sandy. The applicant like to speak to the project?
Sure. Thank you very much. I'm Tim Herndon, representing Off-Piste Incorporated, the developer, and the owner of Off-Piste is also with us tonight, Mr. Tim Schmidt. Thanks for this opportunity. In short, we've worked on this project with the city quite a bit over the years, and I think that we're at a spot now where the only proposed change is to remove a formerly proposed convenience store with fueling station and replace it with a mixed-use structure that would have 5 ground floor office and/or retail spaces and upstairs residential, a couple other office units in the upstairs portion. The impact is diminished significantly. The distance between the proposed building and the surrounding neighborhood has been increased, meaning the distance between the proposed structure and existing residents has increased. The intensity of the use has decreased substantially, and just picture in your mind taking out a convenience store and replacing it with a mixed-use office, retail, residential structure. Finally, another point that illustrates the de-intensification that comes along with this proposal is the overall traffic attracted to the site will be reduced significantly to the tune of between 25 and 30% during the weekend and weekday peak hours. So I just wanted to throw those bullet points out there, and then I remain for questions and discussion as necessary.
Okay. Any commissioners have any questions? It might be helpful just to ask them, if you have questions, ask those before the public comment.
I do, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Sands?
Tim, what's the proposed order of development? Is it lot 2 first, then lot 1 or 3? Does it go numerically? Like
It is, bear with me one moment, Sandy, I'm going to do my best to find you the overall picture. Wrong picture. Okay. Commissioner Sands, north is to the left. The northernmost lot is lot 1, and that's proposed for immediate development.
Okay.
Lots 2 and 3, we have anticipated lot 2 being the second lot to develop, but that's not necessarily the case. It depends on what user in their timeline comes to the table first for those remaining 2 lots.
Okay, thank you.
I have one question. When we were here before, most of the concerns that were raised by the neighbors was about the lighting, since you're uphill from the houses. Have you taken any steps to adjust the lighting arrangements or directions or anything like that?
Thanks, Jim. The measures that we have taken have been to meet code from the get-go. I'll remind you that our development code has a provision for lighting and photometrics, and that requires 0 candle power or 0 lumens at the property boundary. In our case, the property boundary itself is at a minimum of 50 feet away from our closest lamp post, and those lamps will be directed to serve the site, not the adjacent neighborhood, and they will be hooded to minimize or eliminate glare from the point source.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Herndon. This time we'll open this item to public comment. If you wish to speak on this item, we ask you come to the podium, sign in, and then state your name clearly so some of us can write it down. And please limit your comments to 3 minutes. We have the dreaded shot clock over here, which you can look at to see when you need to wrap up your time. You'll get a gentle reminder if you hit that 3-minute point. So we'll open it out to public comment. No takers. All right, seeing no public comment, we'll close public comment and bring it back to the commission for any discussion. Commissioner Sands.
Just a quick question for staff. So Sandy, you mentioned that the area behind the property's drainage easement, and I know that probably one of the next steps is a stormwater report, but are there any anticipated issues with stormwater runoff going into that drainage easement?
No, part of the review included the submission of a drainage study up front with the project. It has been reviewed by our city stormwater engineer, and this study was accepted.
That's all, thanks.
Any other questions, comments, motions? Commissioner Sands.
I'd like to recommend approval of PDP 19-00286 Miracon Preliminary Development Plan based upon the findings of fact presented in the body of the staff report, and forward that to the City Commission for recommendation of approval.
We have a second? Seconded by Commissioner Weaver. So we have a motion by Commissioner Sands, seconded by Commissioner Weaver. Any additional comment by any commissioners? Commissioner Willie.
Just say that we had plenty of questions for you last time around, and I think those were all answered to our satisfaction. So even though we're just now seeing the preliminary development plan, I think we were pretty satisfied with what we heard last time, so yeah, I'm in favor.
And I would just add that with the change in the use, with the reduction in the density and the traffic flow and everything else, I think it's even easier to endorse this at this time. Any other comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion? Passes 7-0. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. Thanks, staff.
Okay, item number 2, consider a request to rezone approximately 0.15 acres from CS Commercial Strip District to RS5 Single Dwelling Residential at 1912 Massachusetts Street.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Becky Pepper with the Planning Department. The subject property at 1912 Massachusetts Street is currently developed with a one-story detached dwelling, which is shown pictured here. The house was originally constructed in 1925, prior to establishment of any of the city's zoning codes. Since the adoption of the first zoning codes, the property has always was given a commercial zoning district and has been zoned for commercial since that time. However, for the majority of its life, it has been established as a residence. And while the residential use is not permitted under the commercial zoning district, the house was considered a non-conforming use because it was legally established. However, in 2006, the non-conforming use status was lost when approval of a site plan for commercial uses when a site plan for commercial uses was approved, and those uses were a tattoo shop and real estate offices. And so the intent of this rezoning request is to reestablish the detached dwelling use in this residential structure. However, because the detached dwelling use is not permitted in the CS zoning district, the request is to rezone the property to RS5 zoning district. The property is located on the east side of Massachusetts Street, near the intersection of Massachusetts and East 19th Street. The zonings surrounding the property include commercial zonings to the north and to the west of the property. Then there are residential zoning districts to the east, south, and southwest of the property. So likewise, the land uses that surround the property include commercial development near the intersection of 19th Street and Mass, and further north of 19th Street. Directly north of the subject property, the land use is a multi-dwelling residential, as are the property to the west. And then the properties to the east and south are developed with detached dwellings. And the property is located within the Barker neighborhood, and as you move further away from the intersection, the area is most recognizable as a detached dwelling residential neighborhood. The findings of the remaining golden factors are provided for you in the staff report. The analysis of the criteria showed that the request complies with the golden factors. So staff recommends forwarding the rezoning application to the City Commission with a recommendation for approval based on the findings listing in the staff report. With that, I will stand for any questions.
Thank you, Becky. Any questions? All right.
Thank you.
Right now. Is the applicant present? Would you like to speak? You wanna- You sign in and tell us your name, please.
Sign in here.
Yes.
My name is Blaine Clark. I'm the owner of the property. I just bought the property January this year.
Do you have any comments?
I own the property to the north as well, the multifamily one. I would just like to rezone it back to a single-family residence, and probably just rent it out as a residence, single family.
Any questions? Okay, thank you very much. This time we'll open this item up to public comment. Do any members of the public wish to comment on this item? Seeing none, we'll bring it back up to the commission. Any discussion? Any questions? I have one, Mr. Clark. I'm just curious, if you can come up. Your backyard, that backyard is mostly concrete pad, and that was a variance that was granted, I can't say which year exactly, but sometime between 2006 and 2012, when I was on the Board of Zoning Appeals, and they had it for a tattoo parlor. Are you gonna keep that as a concrete pad, or do you have any other plans for it?
For right now, I'd probably keep it to use as a parking lot, since I do own the property next door that's multifamily, and maybe use the parking lot for both properties, because the parking lot for the property to the north is pretty tight, and it's a 3-unit house that is transformed to 3 units. So for right now, I keep it.
Okay. All right, thanks. Any other questions or comments, motions? Nobody wants a motion. Commissioner Struckoff.
I'd like to move that we approve the request for rezone 1912 Massachusetts from commercial strip to RS5, forward that recommendation to the City Commission with a recommendation for approval.
Is there a second? Second by Commissioner Sands. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion signify. Passes 7-0. Huh? Or 8, I'm sorry, 8-0. Welcome to our neighborhood. Bring us to item number 3, consider a request to rezone approximately 1.79 acres from RS7, single dwelling residential, to RMO, multi-dwelling residential, located at 1520 Haskell Avenue.
Good evening. This property located at 1520 Haskell Avenue contains a 1-story non-residential structure that most recently was occupied by the Boys and Girls Club. Just some history on the property. The property was undeveloped and zoned RS2 in 1976. That year, a use permitted upon review, or a UPR, which is very similar to our special use permit under our current zoning, That was approved by the City Commission for a fraternal use. In 1977, the building was then constructed. Later, in 1988, a new UPR was approved for a club facility for area youth for the Boys and Girls Club. In 2006, with the adoption of our current zoning code, the property zoning converted from RS2 to RS7. And in 2018, the Boys and Girls Club moved to a new location. And the property has been vacant since that time, but there's now an interested party that would like to reuse the existing building for an office use. And the office use is not permitted in the RS7 zoning district, and so the potential buyer has initiated this rezoning request with support from the current owners. There are 3 residential zoning districts that would permit the office use, and those include the RSO, which is a single dwelling residential office district, the RMG, which is a multi-dwelling residential Greek housing district, and the RMO, a multi-dwelling residential office district. The purpose of the RSO and the RMO districts, as described in the Land Development Code, are the same. And the purpose of these 2 districts is to accommodate low to medium intensity administrative and professional offices, and to act as a transitional zoning district between higher intensity commercial areas and industrial neighborhoods. And because the RSO and the RMO districts are both suitable for the office use, and because the RSO is considered a lesser change from the requested RMO, I want to take a few minutes to compare the 2 zoning districts. A table is provided in the staff report that compares the 2 districts and shows both their similarities and their differences. And this table here provided on this slide just shows only those key differences between the 2 zoning districts. First, the Land Development Code states that the RSO district is more compatible with low and medium density neighborhoods, and that the RMO district is more compatible with medium and high density neighborhoods. Second, the code recommends RSO along collector streets and RMO along collector or arterial streets, and Haskell Avenue has been designated as a minor arterial. Next, there are use standards in the Land Development Code that restrict the permitted size for certain uses in the RSO and in the RMO districts. And where they differ is specific to the office use. The RSO district limits the amount of office space to 300 square feet, while there's no limit on office space in the RMO district. And this difference particularly relates to this rezoning request because the potential buyers indicated that they'd like to use the entire building as office space. However, the building is over 6,000 square feet in size, and so the RSO district would not allow them to use that entire building. Now, the other differences between the RSO and the RMO districts is that the maximum height permitted in the RSO district is 35 feet, while the maximum height in the RMO district is 45 feet. And as an aside, the maximum height permitted under the current RS zoning is 35 feet. And finally, the RSO would allow a maximum of 15 dwelling units per acre, and the RMO would allow a maximum of 22 dwelling units per acre. The subject property is currently zoned RS7, as are the properties to the north and east. To the west, the properties are zoned planned residential developments and contain detached dwelling uses. And then there's multifamily zoning to the south, that RM12 zoning district. And here we can see the surrounding land uses. There's detached dwelling residential development to the north, east, and west, and then multifamily land uses to the south. The land uses do intensify as you go further south down Haskell Avenue. There are some industrial land uses, which are identified here with this purple color. Now, listed on this slide are the new uses that would be permitted for development under the RSO or the RMO zoning districts. The uses that are highlighted red on this slide indicate those uses that would only be permitted in the RMO district, that would not be permitted in the RSO. And those uses include multi-dwelling structure, congregate living, and large religious assemblies, which are large churches that have a minimum capacity of 501 people. Now, the table on this slide shows the maximum number of lots or dwelling units that would be permitted on the subject property given its size of 1.7 acres or 77,900 square feet. The minimum lot area allowed in the RS7 district is 7,000 square feet. So under the current zoning, the property could potentially be redeveloped with 11 single dwelling residential lots. The RSO district permits a maximum of 15 dwelling units per acre, so the total number of dwelling units possibly permitted under that zoning district would be 26. And lastly, the RMO permits a maximum of 22 dwelling units per acre, so the possible total permitted under that zoning district would be 39. Now, with the restriction on office space in the RSO district and with the minimal differences between the RSO and the RMO zoning districts that I previously discussed, staff recommends rezoning the property to the RMO district to help facilitate the reuse of the building as the office use. However, after taking into account the maximum density permitted under the RMO district as it relates to the surrounding zonings and existing densities, staff also recommends that a condition be placed on this zoning to restrict the allowed density to no more than 12 dwelling units per acre. So with that restriction, the property could potentially be developed with 21 dwelling units, which would be less than what would be permitted under the RSO district. And I have more information about the proposed rezoning as it relates to the surrounding areas in a few slides, but first I wanted to briefly discuss the two design review requirements that would be required with most of the potential redevelopment options. First, the subject property is with the environs of the Kibbe House, which is a historically listed property. And as such, the design of any development proposals would be required to be approved by the Historic Resources Commission. And that board would be reviewing the design for size, scale, massing, materials, and setback. And specifically, the board would be reviewing the design for its compatibility with the detached dwelling residential development in the area. As a side note, the Historic Resource Commission had an opportunity to provide comments on the requested rezoning at their June 12th meeting, and they provided no comment. So along with the design review of the HRC, any potential development would also be reviewed through the site plan process. And this is an administrative process that requires notification to property owners within 400 feet of the subject property and to any registered neighborhood association if the property is located within one or if it's adjacent to one. And this property is located within Brook Creek neighborhood. And through the site plan process, the proposed development would be reviewed for compliance with the standards of the Land Development Code. And examples of these include size, setbacks, parking, drainage, and landscaping. For example, if the property rezoned to the RMO zoning district, it would then require a landscaping buffer yard be established between the RM property lines that abut the RS property lines. And that purpose of the landscape buffer yard would be to screen the properties and help mitigate any potential impacts. So with the HRC and the site plan review process, those two processes will help ensure that the future development is compatible with the surrounding area. So earlier this year, on February 12th, the City Commission approved a text amendment to define and clarify the use of conditional zoning. And as part of that text amendment, 4 criteria were added to the code to help evaluate the reasonableness of any proposed conditions. And I think this is the first conditional zoning that's been brought to you since the adoption of that text amendment. And so I just wanted to briefly run through those criteria as they relate to this rezoning request. So the first condition states that the condition shall facilitate a clear, specific goal, policy, or recommendation of an improved area, neighborhood, or nodal plan or comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan is the guiding plan for the area, and the plan supports a progression of land uses to help achieve a transition in land use and intensity. And the plan also states that major or abrupt changes in density and building type should be avoided. And this slide shows the densities of the properties located within 1,000 feet of the subject property. The comprehensive plan designates the RS7 district as low density, the RSO district as medium density, and the RMO as high density. And the subject property is surrounded by low density development to the north, east, and west, and medium density development to the south. So with the condition to restrict the density to a maximum of 12 dwelling units per acre, The proposed rezoning would have a density designation of medium density, which would align with the property to the south. However, if the property were rezoned RMO without the condition, the potential high-density development would be considered an abrupt change to the low-density development to the north and east and west. The second condition states that conditions may be applied when a clear harm to the surrounding area or negative externality is created by the use. Permitting the maximum density of 22 dwelling units per acre could negatively impact the surrounding area with increased traffic, light, and noise. The impacts would be reduced with the condition by limiting the intensity of the development. The third criteria is that the lesser change table cannot be applied to achieve the same result as the proposed conditional rezoning. In the lesser change table, districts considered a lesser change from the RMO district include the RM15, the RM12, and RS districts, which include the RSO district. Of those districts, only the RMO district permits the office use, so the zoning would, the zoning districts would not meet the intent, the other zoning districts would not meet the intent of this rezoning request to reuse the existing building as office. As previously mentioned, the RSO district would permit a maximum of 15 dwelling units per acre, but the restriction on office size would not permit them to use the entire existing building. And then the final criteria is that conditions may not allow an increase in intensity when otherwise restricted by the base district. And the intent of the proposed condition is to reduce the intensity by reducing the maximum permitted density from 22 dwelling units per acre to 12 dwelling units per acre. So staff recommends forwarding the rezoning application to the City Commission with a recommendation for approval based on the findings of fact in the staff report and subject to the following condition, that the maximum allowed density shall not exceed 12 dwelling units per acre. With that, I will stand for any questions.
Thank you, Becky. Any questions for Becky? I'm sure there will be, though. So,
Thank you.
is the applicant present? Would you like to speak to this?
Hello, my name's Jade Brown, and I am General Counsel for Mammoth, Inc., and represent 912 Property Group as well. Our intent here is to increase our office size. We located this site, which will meet our needs. However, the existing zoning is not consistent with the existing building and the historical use of the space. So before purchasing it and fixing it up, we just would like to make sure that whatever zoning is chosen is consistent with what we're doing with it and with the building that's on the site. You know, with our discussion with the Planning and Business Services Department, they've been very helpful in identifying the RSO and the RMO options. We have no objection to the density restrictions, as that is not our intent for the property anyway. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to address them.
Any questions for the applicant before we open public comment?
I have one.
Commissioner Butler.
Mr. Brown, did you say that you were going to keep the existing building, or you're going to, what did you say about that?
Correct. Our intent is to keep the existing building and remodel the insides to allow for more offices, basically. There's some open space, and there's some wear and tear on the building that needs to be repaired. So we do not plan on adding to the building or changing its existing footprint.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I have one. You're willing to drop the density to, what was it again, 12? Would you be willing to drop the density down to what would be permitted in an RS7?
I would need to discuss that with the owners, the purchasing owners, but we would consider it, yes.
Any other questions? All right. Yeah, we're going to open the floor. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm sure there'll be more questions. With that, we'll open the floor to public comment. I'll just remind everybody, please come up to the podium, sign in, state your name, and please limit your comments to the 3 minutes. Anyone like to speak?
Good evening, my name is Michael Allman, 1311 Prairie Avenue in Brook Creek neighborhood. Staff has provided incomplete information from what I see on this rezoning. They said it's to allow the redevelopment of the existing residential structure with an office use. Actually, that's the means, not the goal. The real purpose for the Boys and Girls Club was stated by the planning staff at last month's Historic Resource Commission meeting. The owner wants to broaden the land use categories so they can better market the property. I don't believe your job here is to enhance the marketability of properties. It's to establish compatibility among land uses, and I appreciate the chair's question if they would be willing to reduce the cap. The Boys and Girls Club is asking you for a value-added premium here. Such a public giving, which all upzonings are, would enable a higher sale price than the offer now on the table made by a church. A church is an approved use on this site right now. It would also be a great transition between Edgewood Homes Apartments and the two single-dwelling homes to the north, one of which is the historic Kibbe House. But the RMO zone recommended by staff would not be a transition at all. The 12-unit per acre cap exactly matches Edgewood Homes, bringing their 12-unit per acre density right to the property lines for that abrupt change that we heard about. In his letter to you, Mr. Freyer, who owns the Kibbe House, understood that staff's intent was to maintain the low density designation. He wants the density cap so the uses would not allow an apartment complex. Well, RMO zoning does permit 12 attached units according to section 25033I, page 86 of the digital page of the code. That has apartment complex written all over it as far as I can see. For 38 years, Brook Creek Neighborhood mission has been our adopted neighborhood plan has been to maintain our neighborhood as a primarily single-dwelling residential neighborhood. Mr. Freyer echoed that in his letter. In 1998, we had 4 square blocks directly north of this site rezoned from apartment zoning to single-family zoning. This was a key in saving the 3 John G. Haskell historic homes north of the Kibbe House. With the exception of Edgewood Homes to the south, the property is surrounded to the east-north by RS 6.2 units per acre and the west by 5.6 units per acre, essentially 6 units an acre. That's consistent with the rest of the neighborhood. We wanted the density to stay the same in our neighborhood. 6 units per acre is an appropriate cap. If the purchaser cannot make it pencil at 6 units per acre, then maybe the Boys and Girls Club should be satisfied with selling it for the more appropriate use of the church.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Any other public comment?
Hello, my name's David Frere. I have the Kibbe property. I've lived there for 30 years, so it almost should become the Frere property, I think. But I wrote a letter to the commission about the change in zoning, and hearing the presentation today, it seems like the RMO zoning would allow fewer units in the place than the RSO, should Mammoth decide to sell. So for me, and if you haven't read my letter, I own the whole eastern perimeter of the Boys and Girls Club, plus a little bit of the north perimeter. For me, this is a reasonable request. I know they need the extra space, and RSO doesn't allow them beyond 3,000 square feet. So I'll just reiterate that I further support the zoning change as I outlined in my letter. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Seeing none, we'll bring it back up to the commission. Anyone have any comments or questions to start? Okay. Commissioner Sinclair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Mr. Allman may have alluded to this, but I don't know if this is a question for you, Becky, or but what sorts of apartments, are there any comparables, I guess, of what could be built on the property or what the property could be redeveloped to when we have a 12 unit per acre maximum density in RMO? Is there something in town? I don't know if Mr. Allman may have mentioned it, but just so I can have an idea.
Well, can't think of anything specific, and maybe Scott can, but I would reiterate that as part of the review, it would be going through HRC for that design review. And so they would be looking at a design that was compatible with the detached dwelling residential neighborhood. So something that was smaller in the scale was smaller, materials that were matching the area. The multifamily to the south is developed more, they're one-story buildings, they're smaller in size. It's not a large building with many units in that one building.
Okay, and if I can ask a follow-up, Mr. Chair. Was any discussion had about continuing the current height limit of 35 feet to be an additional restriction with this rezoning?
That's not something that had been part of the discussion, no.
Okay. So I guess, putting aside HRC's role, something could come up later on that would add another story or something to whatever building is there, above a two-story building or whatever that's kind of common to the area.
Right, the RMO would permit the
Okay.
45, maximum height of 45 feet. I think more other conditions, we're recommending this one condition, but there could be a condition also add, a recommendation to add that.
And Mr. Chair, if I may, just add on to Becky's good response, is that there are other constraints here with the HRC review, with the parking that the property can attain. I think Becky presented that both RSO and RMO can be compatible with residential. It's a residential category. And so RSO in particular, I think, is where part of the reason we landed at the 12 units, very under what the RSO district density-wise provides.
Thank you.
So Scott, if this was to be redeveloped, upon a future sale, everything would have to go to historic resources before it came here.
Correct. Under today's codes, yes.
Yeah. I'm struggling a little bit with the transition. I mean, what are we transitioning from to by having a higher use zoning category and not even dropping it down to something that's in between the public housing to the south and the single-family residential to the north? It's just keeping it the same moving the same density up the street. So what is the transition here in the eyes of staff?
Becky can interject as well, but I don't know if it's necessarily the transition as much as it's the compatibility question of if the code by definition states compatibility between RSO and RS districts, knowing that RSO is a higher density than RS7, but those are compatible densities, we land at something lower than RSO. And so also taking into account that it's an existing office use today, what we're trying to attempt is to obviously accommodate that, but make sure that the density compatibility issue doesn't get away from us if and when uses change in the future.
Any other comments, questions? Commissioner Willie?
So under the current RS7 zoning that it has, you can have 11 units or 11 lots on that property. And then there would be a possibility of twice as many under the restriction if we went to 12 units per acre. Would it be possible to drop that density back down to, since we're restricting it anyway, this conditional zoning back down to what would have been allowed under RS7. Would fit the neighborhood pretty well if it's an acceptable condition. I do really like that we're finding a way for them to use the entire building for office. So I'm just kind of trying to decide if that's a better transition, if that's what you're getting to for numbers.
Mm-hmm.
I think this slide represents, and it, so RS7 calculates out to be about 6 units per acre. So when you take that times the 1.79, you get 11 lots yielded on the property. So that's what Becky's done with the calculation, is just taken each district's density requirement times the number of acres yields you a total permitted number of dwelling units. Now, again, those are also constrained by HRC review of the design, by the parking, by stormwater, by setbacks, by other code elements, and it's atypical to maximize your density given all those other constraints. But I think this slide is where so I've asked Becky to keep this slide up there for your review and discussion as it moves further.
I didn't hear an answer, though.
Well, the answer is that if you want to match RS7, which is one of the surrounding zoning districts around this site, you would need to condition it to 6 units per acre, not 12. Or somewhere in the range between 6 and 12 if you want some sort of transition.
I don't see how you are at math in your head.
Not good.
A lot of it, well, as we heard from Mr. Allman, calculating out what the actual use there is now is about 6 RS6, which we don't have as a category, but about how many units would go in if we had something in between RS5 and RS7?
RS5 and RS7?
Now, I know it would increase the number a bit, but by how many?
Yeah, so that would be about 8 times, about 14-ish
About 14.
units.
So, excuse me, you're talking about the RS7, but still retaining the office use?
Yes,
So the entire,
yes, we already have one proposed condition that's been agreed to lower the density in the future on this.
Mr. Chairman, I roughly used 8 units per acre to get to about 14.
Okay.
And Jeff said that he did the math, it's 15.
And then
15,
we
see?
had Commissioner Sinclair asking about possibly a second condition to keep the height restriction at 35 instead of increasing it to 45. So I guess what we're doing now is exploring how to modify the proposed conditions a little bit.
Mr. Chair.
Which one?
I do think that Historic Resources is going to have quite a lot of say. And
Mhm.
so the height restriction, I think 45 feet probably wouldn't pass that anyway. So we could make that a restriction, but I think it's probably already kind of implied by the process. And possibly the same thing will go for the density too, that even if we say 12 units per acre, that Historic Resources might counter that in their ways too. But I feel like if we are more specific with that, that helps future developers plan for what may be available, and kind of sends a message to Historic Resources too, if we say, all right, we know that kind of density you're not going to like, but what about this? I think it might give more clarity if we settle on a number.
Any other comments, questions? Either Commissioner Sinclair or Commissioner Willie, care to take a stab at a motion?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just process-wise, we give the applicant a chance to rebut.
Oh, sure. Okay, the applicant, do you want to come up and comment on what we're commenting on?
Mr. Brown?
You want to come up and have, it's your chance to comment on what the discussion and what the public has had to say.
No, other than, I respect the topic of the conversation in terms of what this could mean in the future. I would just say that it is not our intent to develop the area at this time. Granted, future owners could choose to do such, but the neighborhood and the conditions will change at that point as well. It'll be a different place at a different time. you know, a church was mentioned. However, we're planning an office use, which is going to have lower traffic and ingress and egress from the property than you would see in a public location. So we're anticipating probably maybe 24 people on site on a regular basis. The existing parking is sufficient for that. The existing area will serve our needs. As far as the height, I don't know that the existing structure would support additional height. It might require another structure, which would then again have to go through historic review and planning review as well. So, you know, I feel that you all will have another bite at the apple if this becomes a problem in the future. That said, it's not our intent to change anything about the existing use, and actually just to improve it as it sits today.
All right, thank you.
I have a question for Mr. Brown. You expressed that perhaps the owners would be amenable to a further restriction on the density. Scott, perhaps you could tell what the process would be if we wanted to pursue that. Would they have to return here? What would they go through?
No, the application is before the planning commission. It's really your recommendation and your decision on where the density recommendation to the city commission goes. Of course, it's always helpful if there's a concurrence by the applicant, so the question always goes to the applicant about where you land on that. But ultimately, it's up to the city commission on this rezoning request.
I would say to that point, our only issue with the site now is that the zoning is not compatible with the existing structure for office use. Our only concern would be that if we modify the existing zoning beyond the bounds of what is typical, that the site again becomes difficult to use or difficult to sell in the future, or just, you know, I mean, that's where we are right now, is that it was originally zoned one way, and now things have changed, and the existing structure is no longer suited for the zoning.
All right, thank you. Any additional comments or questions? Motions?
Just make a comment.
Comment?
So I think we're all happy with the use and making sure that the whole building can be used for the office use you're proposing, and we don't have any issues with that, but we're always tasked with looking at the next step beyond what the applicant or the owners are looking at, and so we're just kind of looking out for the neighborhood as what other possibilities might happen. But I think it's certainly not out of line. I think we're really trying to be accommodating to make sure that use can happen as you're looking for. So.
Understood, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Where are we?
Mr. Chair, if I could, I'm not going to propose that we add an additional restriction on the height unless someone else does. I was asking the questions mainly to tease out what discussions were had of this and what we can expect in the future. I feel pretty comfortable with the fact that the Historic Resources Commission will be looking at these things pretty closely to monitor that. And I also appreciate Mr. Frayer sending his letter and then speaking to as a neighbor that is directly adjacent to the property and being in support of it as it is now. So I give that a lot of weight as we consider this.
Yes, Starkov.
I'm inclined to support this. I think that I appreciate the concerns about density in this, call it a transitional area. I think that RSO and residential RS7, RSO is designed to address that compatibility issue, as Scott alluded to earlier, and I think we've gone below that density here. I'm generally comfortable with this, and I'm in support of it as the application exists. I'm not inclined to put a further restriction on it. I have confidence in the reviews that will be done by HRC in the future should such an application occur.
Any further comment? Commissioner Willing.
I'm reasonably okay with the 12 dwelling units per acre restriction. I kind of think that's going to be a little bit too much density for that neighborhood, and whether we want to leave that for HRC to come up with, I think is a possibility. I would also see dropping that, maybe not as far as 6 dwelling units per acre, but something in between. Is anyone else interested in that, or leave it as it is?
I am, because this is one of those types of properties that I've had problems with in the past, before I was on the planning commission. That we're creating a zoning area that's kind of an island unto itself. And if we are going to use conditional zoning, I want to make it have the restriction on it with the density that is as compatible with the surrounding structures on the 3 sides than we do. So I'd like to explore the possibility of dropping that density a little bit. And then I'd be okay with going forward with the RMO.
What number are you thinking?
Well, I don't know. What were we at with? We had 11 with RS7,
You had 11 lots with a density of 6.
right?
You had 11 units. You had 15 units with a density of 8.
Right.
And
And we're at-
21 units with a density of 12.
And with the current proposal with the drop, we're at 21.
21.
At 12 units per acre, it yields 21 units, yes.
Yeah.
I would make a recommendation that we discuss dropping it to 8 units per acre, which would be 15, possibility of 15 lots there. And it's possible that that wouldn't get passed through the HRC, but I think that at least signals to any future development that's going to be something that they have to watch out for and discuss. And I think that offers a little bit more transition from the neighborhood to the south and the single-family dwelling to the north.
I could agree with that. Now I just lost my thought.
Commissioner Butler might have one.
Commissioner Butler.
No, I was just going to say that I agree with Commissioner Struckoff. I don't have any problem with the staff recommendation as written, so I'm not inclined to support a lower density, and I think it's fine as it is.
I'm fine as it is, but I would also consider a lower density without proposing one myself.
I think the lower density would have a better chance of getting right through historic resources. It might make it easier for a future buyer, actually, given that area. Since we have a historic property that basically is on 2 sides, it's not going to change very much in the future. And the public housing to the south is not going to change in the future. And across the street it's a planned unit development at the corner. That's not changing in the future. So I think that intersection is pretty locked in, unless something happens with the old elementary school and the church that's on the other corner. So I think we're pretty much locked in for what's there, so I guess that's my arguments in favor of dropping it down to the 8 per acre for a total of 15.
I don't quite understand, if you can explain a little bit more about your reasoning for wanting to drop it from, as it stated here, to 8 what's your concern?
Yeah, I don't see a transition. By what's proposed by staff, I don't see any transition. It's essentially extending the same density of the public housing to the south all the way up into what is being surrounded by it as historic property. And also, it's not, that increased density is less compatible with north, south, and east. It's only compatible with, I mean, north, east, and west. It's only compatible with the south. So my reasoning is I would like to see the density decreased to where it's more compatible with what's on 75% of the boundaries of the property, as opposed to just 25% of the boundary.
So is your thinking like the density is going to somehow impact the property that's there the single-family dwelling, is
I
that?
s- I see that potential. I also know that that intersection is problematic. It's been proposed for some changes in the past, including a proposed roundabout. It is identified as there is some sort of a traffic issue. I've been caught by those stop signs. That's just anecdotal, of course, but I do know there's been discussion about that intersection and how to improve its functionality. It just hasn't quite met the markers to actually, for the city to budget and do it, but it has been a problem. And the lower the density in the future, I mean, if we have the density as high as what's proposed, that could impact that, just in the ability to make a left turn going south into that property. So I guess that's kind of my list. Anyone else? Any motions?
I'll make a motion, and if it fails, then that's okay too. I move that we approve the request to rezone approximately 1.79 acres from RS7 to RMO and forward it to the City Commission with a recommendation for approval based on the findings of fact in the staff report, and subject to the following condition, that the maximum allowed density shall not exceed 8 dwelling units per acre.
Have a second.
Not even a second.
I'll
Oh, there we
second.
go.
Second by Commissioner
I'll second it, yeah.
Sinclair. Any further discussion?
I just want to go on record saying that I'm going to support the motion. After hearing the discussion, I was, I think, initially indifferent to changing it to a lower density, but as Scott, I think, pointed out very well, that with setbacks and easements and everything else that would go into that, I don't think the development would be able to achieve the maximum anyway, so I think we're at about a wash. And if it gives the neighborhood something to hang their hat on, and it's a good compromise, then I'm for it.
Any other comments? Commissioner Strachan.
I appreciate the flexibility of the applicant and of the adjacent homeowner on the Kibbe property to work for this. I agree that I really would like to see this use succeed, and I think it's a perfect use for this location. I hope this compromise will work. I will support the motion.
Anyone else? Okay, with that, all those in favor of the motion? All those opposed? 8-1. 7-1. Brings us to item number 4. We consider a request to rezone approximately .66 acres from IG General Industrial to CS Commercial Strip located at 622 and 628 North 2nd Street.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Luke Mortensen. I'm a planner with the Lawrence Douglas County Planning Department. And as Commissioner Carpenter just noted, item number 4 tonight is a request to rezone approximately .66 acres from IG District to CS District. I'd like to quickly orient everybody to the subject property's location. We're up in North Lawrence, on the east side of North 2nd Street, midway between Lincoln and Lion Streets. The subject property is comprised of all or portions of 3 platted lots, and there's an existing building that was constructed in 1920 per Douglas County records. So these 2 maps illustrate the existing zoning and land use conditions on and around the subject property. There are a number of zoning districts, and so the zoning map is on the left. There are a number of zoning districts present up in this portion of North Lawrence. The subject property's current IG district goes north to Lion Street and then west across North Second Street. There is existing CS directly to the south of the subject property, as well as north of Lion Street for much of North Second Street. The RS7 district is located directly east of the property. The map on the right shows the existing land uses in the area, and you'll have to forgive me because it looks like my key didn't show up on the PowerPoint. But red symbolizes commercial uses, purple is industrial, yellow is detached dwelling, residential, that kind of light yellow, and gray is vacant or undeveloped. There are mostly commercial uses surrounding the subject property. I'm sure you're all aware of the character up in that portion of North Lawrence. There's quite a few vehicle sales and service uses. This slide shows the existing conditions of the site. The applicant has provided the existing and proposed tenant information as indicated by the building plan in the bottom corner. The applicant is proposing the rezoning to CS district to accommodate two proposed uses that are not permitted in the IG district. This table illustrates the applicant's request for the CS district. The two existing uses, so those are construction, sales, and service use, and manufacturing and production limited use. Those are both permitted in both the IG and the CS districts. However, the proposed fast order food and personal convenience services use are only permitted in the proposed CS district. You'll see the note regarding the SUP requirement for the existing Jumpin' Johnny. That's the manufacturing and production limited use. Per the Land Development Code, an automatic special use permit would be granted to the existing manufacturing and production limited use upon the rezoning of the subject property. And the code section is below there in the white letters. So I'll next briefly take you through staff's review of the golden factors and criteria. The applicant's responses can be found in your packet. I've included the portions of the comprehensive plan that support the applicant's request. So Horizon 2020 recognizes North 2nd and North 3rd Street as an existing strip commercial area that should act as a gateway or entranceway to Lawrence. It also calls for replacement of incompatible uses along the corridor and replacement with compatible commercial, service, or retail uses similar to what the applicant has proposed. The comprehensive plan's future land use map supports the applicant's request as well. You will see that the red color symbolizes office and commercial uses, and those have been recommended and adopted in the comprehensive plan. So this slide compares the subject property's existing zoning to the comprehensive plan's future land use map. There are some office and commercial uses that are permitted in the IG district. However, the rezoning to CS district is necessary to more closely align the future land uses recommended with the comprehensive plan. So the North Lawrence Neighborhood Plan was adopted by this body in 1981. It recognizes the inconsistency between land uses and zoning districts that exist for some parcels in North Lawrence. It recommends rezoning properties to match their use. It also notes a preference for neighborhood convenience uses to serve surrounding residential areas without adversely affecting existing land uses. Finally, the North Lawrence Neighborhood Plan's land use map calls out specifically North 2nd Street and the subject property as a recommended area for commercial uses. So just quickly going through the rest of the criteria, the subject property is not generally suited for the IG district. The existing building does not comply with IG setbacks and access recommendations. The number and size of existing tenant suites is better suited for commercial uses instead of the moderate and high impact industrial uses that the IG district is intended to accommodate. The subject property is not vacant at this time. And then staff does not believe that the proposed rezoning would detrimentally affect nearby properties. The request to rezone to CS is in compliance with multiple future land use maps, and it aligns the parcel with its neighbor to the south. Subject property is also under administrative review in the site planning process with another planner at this time. Denial of this request will maintain the current IG district. There would be little gain to the public, as a denied request would limit the redevelopment opportunities for the site. At this time, there were no public comments or inquiries related to this rezoning request. Rezoning this existing developed property to CS would move the subject property towards compliance with the neighborhood plan and Horizon 2020. It would also help us to continue the transition of this corridor to a more commercial service and retail-oriented space. In conclusion, staff recommends forwarding the rezoning application to the City Commission with a recommendation for approval based on the findings in the staff report. I can stand for questions, and then I know that the applicant is here tonight as well.
Thank you. The applicant like to speak?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Patrick Watkins. I'm here on behalf of the owner. Thank you, Luke, for the work and the positive recommendation from staff. We appreciate their collaboration on this. This is part of an assemblage, sort of mini assemblage in North Lawrence along North 2nd. The owner recognizes that this is really sort of a rugged part of the entryway into Lawrence. It's turned heavily auto-related. This particular location and property is suited for commercial activity, and it's really one of the first steps to make this particular block more approachable, more user-friendly, more part of the neighborhood. We can answer any questions that you might have. I kind of want to save some secrets for the tenants to release when they're ready, but we hope to bring this property and a couple others into like I said, a more approachable condition, more usable condition for the neighborhood. The owner that's purchased them is interested in helping out North Lawrence.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant? Seeing none, we'll open this to public comment. Any members of the public that wish to comment on this item? All right, seeing none, we'll bring it back to the commission. Any discussion, questions?
I have a question.
Commissioner Willie.
Luke, as I read through the staff report, I think I saw that the North Lawrence neighborhood plan is not incorporated into Horizon 2020. Is that correct?
Correct.
Why is that?
Scott, I'm going to defer to you on that one.
What, 1981?
So, yeah, that's it. We made a decision, a choice long ago to kind of put a time limit on the validity of plans that were greater than 15 years old or whatever the time limit was. So we still look to them, for information and a little bit of policy guidance, but they don't carry the weight of being adopted into the plan.
May I have a follow-up question? On the North Lawrence neighborhood plan, that is not accepted in the Horizon 2020, but the map that you showed there that had the area slated for commercial use, did it break out commercial and industrial? I couldn't see that it had industrial listed on there in any different way.
Looks like, yep, you have a light and a heavy industrial, different hatching, so it is
Okay.
specified.
Okay, so that is strictly commercial, the area that we're looking at?
In our little red
Designated.
circle between Lincoln and Lyon, yeah.
Mhm. Thank you.
Any other questions? Comments? Motions?
I just had a question, going back to the North Lawrence plan. Is there any update of that in progress at all, or do you know if anybody's working on it?
Not in progress, no.
Thank you.
That was cryptic.
I took tips from the congressional hearing.
I was gonna say, you had a certain inflection there.
Commissioner Strucker.
I'd like to make a motion
No, I was
okay,
going to say,
all
go
right,
right ahead.
To approve the request to rezone 622 to 628 North Second Street from IG to CS, and forward that to the City Commission with a recommendation for approval.
Have a second? Seconded by Commissioner Ashworth. Further discussion, comments? I just have to say, I've driven by this twice a day since probably 1993. And it's, at many times, has had uses in there that would not conform to its current zoning. And so it's been through lots of different attempts to have ongoing businesses in there. I hope this is more successful this time. I'm all behind this. I mean, the absence of anyone from the North Lawrence Improvement Association kind of speaks that they don't have opposition, because if they did, they would be here. So with that, any other comment, or Commissioner Williams?
Well, I never give up industrial zoning without at least saying something, but I do agree that this is more appropriate for those smaller buildings to be commercial rather than, and it does help our entry, the look of our entry. So even though it means then that puts the manufacturing into an SUP, I struggled with that at first, and why not have SUPs for the two that are proposed and leave that conforming, but I think that this is appropriate, and I'm gonna vote for it.
Any other comments? All right, now let's call the vote. All those in favor? Passes 8-0. And one more item. And quite a few people. Want a brief break before we take on this last one? Why don't we take a 10-minute break, and then we'll you seen Mary's?
Mary was actually at the horseshoe tournament,
All right,
pitching horseshoes.
we'll be back. One more item, the last item on our agenda is a CUP to consider a conditional use permit for Hunter's Crossing Event Center located on approximately 80 acres northeast of the intersection of East 1500 and North 900 roads. Sandy?
Yes. Thank you. Sandy Day, and I am standing in for Mary, so I will do my best. She has actually written me a script, so I will try to stay on task as well. First order of business, there is a minor error in the staff report in the early part of it. There is a reference to the property being part of and in the urban growth area, and it should read that the property is not located in the urban growth area, it's adjacent to it. So we need to make that correction. And then that also relates to condition number 1, as it pertains to annexation, or an annexation agreement. Subject property includes 80 acres. It's located on the northeast corner, the intersection of E 1500 Road and N 900 Road. The conditional use permit would be for approximately 9 acres of that 80 acres. It's shown in black on this slide. The property is located just south of the Lawrence urban growth area and east of Highway 59. I mentioned the error in the staff report. The property is outside of the UGA. And the annexation agreement noted in condition number 1 is not required with the project. The proposal is for a 7,920 square foot event center near the pond that is also located on the property on the north side. Outside activities would occur between the facility and the pond with a patio that would be installed there in the future. The facility is a wood structure with a rural design which would be compatible with other rural structures in the area. Mary asked me to go over some of the agritourism elements with this project. It is an agritourism use with the proposed occupancy of 375 people, which exceeds the size limit that allows processing through just simple registration. In order to encourage agritourism, the zoning regulations were revised to create a more streamlined review process for lower intensity agritourism uses. Those that are very low intensity, size that is limited to not more than 40 parking spaces, activities that occur on agricultural land, and that the operator lives on the property. Those are the ones that are the lower intensity. Are tier 1 and can be processed through the Zoning and Codes Office administratively with no public notice. Tier 2 uses are considered more impactful and are allowed to be on larger properties, including up to 100 parking spaces. There's no requirement for that use to be on the agricultural ground, and the operator does not need to live on site. Those require a Board of County Commission action for the registration. If the agritourism exceeds Tier 2 standards, as is this case, then it's required to obtain approval through the CUP process. This use meets several of the standards for the Tier 1. It's on agricultural land, and the operator lives on property. However, the size of the event center moves it beyond the limits of a Tier 2, and approval is required for this conditional use permit. This graphic illustrates the proposed layout of the use. The majority of the site will remain in agricultural use or as open space. A drive north of the tree line would be providing access to the facility, which would be oriented toward the pond, and a circular drive drop-off area would be provided on the south side of the building. This provides a direct line of sight from the driveway to the building from the abutting street. The slide shows 100 parking spaces would be provided in a gravel parking area with a grassed overflow area that is provided in case additional parking becomes necessary for a particular event. 5 ADA spaces would be located adjacent to the center, and a one-way circular drive would be provide drop-off at the door entry to the building. Conditional use permit application was viewed with the golden factors. Those are outlined in your staff report. The area is predominantly agriculturally zoned with some A1 suburban residential home zoning to the northeast. This has been developed with platted rural subdivisions since 2006. New platted residential subdivisions are not possible, and land divisions for residential uses are completed through the certificate of survey process. Parcels in the green and blue were divided through the certificate of survey. She's referring to this area here. Blue are the residential development parcels that can be developed with residents. Green are those areas for future development areas that cannot be developed until the property is annexed into the city. Small parcels in the white areas were created prior to 2006 through the 5 and 10 acre exemption survey process. A mix of land uses is located in the area. Agricultural and rural residential uses are the predominant land use. Woodland and wooded stream corridors are present throughout the area, and the applicant's additional farm property and residence are located to the south of the subject property. Subject property is hay mowed, and the intent is to keep it in hay production with the addition of the event center. As noted earlier, the blue outline parcels in the certificate of survey are eligible for residential building permits. Some residents may have been built since this last aerial photograph was taken. These residential properties are noted in blue. Other existing residents in the area are marked with red, with the applicant's residence marked in yellow. This graphic illustrates the mixed-use agricultural and residential areas, uses in the area. With proper conditions, the event center should be compatible with surrounding zoning and land uses. This area is characterized by small parcels, residential development, and agricultural uses, and stream corridors with the associated floodplain. High-quality agricultural land is located throughout the area. Some of it is located in the southwest corner of the subject property outside of the conditional use permit request. It is these areas that are highlighted in these hatched patterns. Not all small parcels are currently developed with residences. The Piano Key lots near Highway 59 have been determined to be ineligible for building permits as they were divided without the required frontage. So while those parcel divisions are showing up, those are not actually buildable lots as they are laid out. The event center would allow this 80 acres of parcel to remain in agricultural production. It would introduce a new use into the area, but with proposed rural design of the building and the location within the interior of the property, it should be compatible with the character of the area. This area has a good network of higher classification roads. The facility would access E1500 Road, a minor collector, south of N1000 Road, a principal arterial, which also is Haskell Road extended, to the north of N1000 Road. N1000 Road is also a principal arterial which connects to Highway 59 to the west. Adequate higher classification roads exist in the area to accommodate the proposed traffic without requiring travel on lower classification township roads. The applicant proposes a building with rural design that has proposed several operating conditions to maintain the rural character, and those are reflected as your conditions of approval. The applicant has agreed to use a mellower 3000K LED light fixture rather than the 4000K lights commonly used to illuminate parking lots. These are recommended by the International Dark Sky Association to preserve wildlife and protect natural nightscapes. These lights will be only used when the facility is in use. One security light would remain on. Building lights would be recessed or soffit lit. Light poles would use full cutoff fixtures to minimize off-site glare, and fireworks would not be prevented at this property. These conditions will maintain the rural character and also help to minimize any detrimental impacts to nearby properties. The applicant also proposes additional conditions to minimize any detrimental effects to the nearby properties. In addition to the lighting levels, lights being off when the facility is not in use, and the prohibition of fireworks. Operating hours would be from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. weeknights, Sunday through Thursday, and 8 a.m. to midnight weekends, Friday and Saturday nights. Outdoor amplified music would not be used past 9 p.m., and the occupancy may not exceed 375 persons. The applicant has proposed ending times for the serving of alcohol. These conditions and the proximity of the property to the higher classification road network should mitigate detrimental effects to nearby land uses. The property is well suited for uses to which it has been restricted in the A district. It is currently used for agriculture and will continue in ag production with the addition of the event center. Property has been zoned A agricultural, and used for agricultural uses since 1966. Given the proximity of the event center to the major transportation network, the conditions applied on the use, and the fact that the majority of the property will remain in agricultural production, the denial of the conditional use permit would result in no gain to the public health, safety, or welfare. Denial would remove this option for agritourism use on the property for the owner. The comprehensive plan recommends that agro and ecotourism uses be encouraged. Excuse me. Placing a portion of this property in an agritourism use would reduce the ability to divide the property for future residential uses and would help maintain the ag use for the remainder of the property. Staff's recommendation is for approval and forwarding it to the Board of County Commissioners with a recommendation for approval, with the exception to strike condition number 1 related to the annexation agreement. I'm happy to try and answer any questions that may be somewhat limited. The applicant is here, and I believe there are some members of the public here to speak to you as well.
Thank you, Sandy. The applicant like to speak about the project?
We're going to tag team a little bit here. First of all, I'm going to give you a little history on the land and our family.
Can we have your names first,
I'm
please?
sorry, Eugene George, and this is Laura George.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. I'm going to give you a little history on the family and the farm and everything, and then I'll let Laura get into why we decided to do this and what caused it and everything. We started dairying, well, we was born and raised in Douglas County. We've been here our whole lives. And we got married in '87. We got 2 grown children, 27 and 23. And we've been dairying, we dairied for 30 years out there on this farm. I'm a 3rd generation dairyman out here. Our family's owned the farm for 70 some years. And we dairied for 30 years, raised the kids up in the farm environment. It was really nice to do that. Really good to raise them up that way. And then 2011, I quit dairying, and I started just raising cattle there. And that's what I've been doing up to now. And then my wife, she works at LMH. She got a job in 2011 there. So I'll let her tell you how we got to thinking about this venue.
Well, talking over things with my family, my daughter got engaged this spring. We went down to the pond she went down there, that's where he wanted to propose. So we went down there and she got proposed to. We were looking around, she said, "I'm gonna get married here." I said, "Well, when are you getting married?" She said, "This fall." I said, "Well, when?" She said, "October, because I want the colors. I want the fall colors." I said, "October in Kansas, weather." We had snow last year. So I got nervous about it. We talked about it and they said, "Well, we can figure it out. We'll rent tents and we'll, figure it all out." So we went in the house and she just started messing around looking for venues. I mean, we went to multiple weddings out of this county because it's hard to find a venue in Douglas County, especially in the country. I know there's a couple, but they're not real big. But we couldn't find anything this fall because it's short notice. So then she started getting on there and she started making calls and there's nothing available next fall. There is here and there, but she wanted October. And she's going back to school and she said, I don't want to wait that long. We'll just figure it out. Well, then she found a venue that was out in Carbondale. This went up this fall. It went in to production last fall. And we went out there, we called them up, they said, yeah, well, you can get married on a Friday out here if you want to come out and look at it. The venue wasn't even done. So we go in down there, and we look it over, and it's sitting on the lake that actually does the service water for Shawnee County. I think it's called Carbondale Lake. And they built this venue on there, and it's beautiful, and it's big, and it's nice. But, you know, it's not done, and I'm thinking, oh, gosh, you know, whatever. But we got till fall. There's plenty before that. So she started looking around to other places, and we went ahead and said, you know, we'll think about it, and then we'll let them know. So then the next day we called, and we booked it because she couldn't find anything else. And so we started thinking about it, and we thought, we have this great pond. We want to keep our farm, you know, working on the farm. He wants to keep working on the farm. He wants to still do cattle and raise them. And we said, you know, this could be something we could do as a family. So we decided that, you know, we might just do this and see if this is something we could, you know, bring into our livelihood and, you know, we could retire with. Because we plan on living there. We're not going to leave. We want to stay here. We're going to be here when this venue's going, if it's going. We'll be there. It's not going to be ran by any corporation. It's not going to be sold off. It's going to be us running it. Me, my husband, and my daughter. And, you know, we want to preserve the beauty of it. We've got some issues with the pond, which we'll show you, you know, that, you know, it's going to take some work to get it fixed up. You know, there's tree lines in between, you know, other areas. And, you know, we just want to try to get this going and do something that we could keep our family all interested in and involved in. Is this how it works? Is this the right one? Is it this one? I can't see. No, that's not it. Is that for ours? Nope.
This is the view of our pond. Is this?
Yeah.
Okay, there's the two pictures. You're standing where the event center would be, the north view and the east view. The east view, you're looking at the pond there, and the north view is looking toward the housing development, which you can't see. You know, there's several trees in the way and a lot of brush and everything. Okay, the issue we got with the pond that we need to fix is it's leaking really bad underneath that tube there, the overflow tube. It's hard to keep the water in. There's a lot of moss and algae in there. And for this venue to work, we're going to have to fix this pond and get her perfect. And that, therefore, it would help. Some people might complain it's going to hurt the wildlife and stuff, but to me right now, that's hurting the wildlife the way the pond is, the shape the pond is right now. And see that you can see right there the moss and everything, and some of that could be some blue-green algae, which I don't know if you guys ever heard of that, but that's pretty bad. That could kill animals there.
We lost a lot of fish last summer. We went down there. We had a smell, and so we went down there, and the whole pond was covered with fish. And I think they lost oxygen with the drought. And we do have a leak in the dam, so we knew that, but I think that's what they lost the oxygen. I think that was the cause of losing the fish down there.
And that view, the first view to the left there is facing west there. That's on the other side of the pond dam.
And that would be the way you'd be looking up towards the event center to that direction.
What this means to me is I guess you can call it, I'm finding a niche to keep the farm going. Some farmers, the farming is getting so tough where you gotta keep getting larger and larger and larger to make it work. And some farmers went to a pumpkin patch. That causes a lot of traffic and everything, but how can you imagine not having a pumpkin patch for the kids? You can't. That's the best thing for them. You got sunflowers. You've heard that sunflower patch up north, how busy it gets. People in town like to do things like that. Then you got you pick strawberries. That's another niche that these farmers that can't get larger do. And I guess what I'm saying, this is kind of my niche where I could continue my farm to a fourth generation like my daughter. She's really interested in doing this to help us with it. And I understand there's concerns, but I feel like I've tried everything I knew of to keep the time limits right for them, and we got plenty of trees in the way, but we'll see what the public comment says on that. You got anything else?
We're just hoping that this would be something, I don't like to have to go to a wedding out of county. And I have to go to multiple ones because it's hard to find a venue in Douglas County in a rural area. And like I said, I know of about 3 or 4 in Douglas County. And the reason our size is at 375, the average wedding is 125 to 130 people. We want this just for the size reason that I want room. When I go to a wedding, I want to sit down, I want to be able to mingle around. You know, if they want to dance, we don't have to take all the tables down and do all that. I'm not saying that we won't have 300 people there at times, because I think there could be. My daughter's getting married and her fiance has a split family. There's 80 immediate families, what they consider immediate family, and that's not even getting into cousins and whatever, but it would have to be. But I just, you know, we want room. You know, we could go with a smaller one, but the amount of money that it's going to take to build roads and to fix this ponds.
Put the electricity down there and the water and everything.
But I want to be able to stay in our county. I want to be able to, I know 5 scheduled weddings that are out of this county because venues can't be found. And these are weddings that are scheduled through 2020, or 2020, whatever it is, yeah.
And I got a letter here. You guys got one in your packet, am I right, on John McClary? Do you have that one in your packet? Yes, we do. That's in favor of the, okay, you got it, okay, you read it, so I won't read it. He's in favor of the venue, and he lives exactly southeast of the venue. His property line is probably within 800 feet of the venue. Then here's another letter, didn't make it in time, I want to read to you guys, that's in favor of it. To whom it may concern, my wife and I own Lot 7 in Hunters Crossing Rural Subdivision. We plan on building on our lot in 2 to 3 years. After reviewing some information concerning the proposed Hunter Crossing Event Center and talking to a few other people who own land in the subdivision as well as Eugene George himself, we have no issues with the proposal. The proposed 4-acre event center is exactly the type of venue at which my wife and I enjoy attending events. Eugene's proposal seems reasonable, size, parking rules, etc. We also feel as if Eugene will be motivated to keep the other 76 acres of the land in its beautiful natural state because that is what attracts people to book events at this country venue. Sincerely, Mark Best.
Okay, thank you.
That's all I have.
Thanks. Any questions for the applicant before we go to public comment? Okay. This time we'll open the floor to public comment. I'll just remind everybody, if you want to speak, please come up to the podium, sign in. Please state your name clearly so that we know who you are, and please do your best to limit your comments to 3 minutes.
Good evening. I'm Craig Campbell. This is my wife, Lisa. With your permission, can she join me? We're at 1523 North 962 Road, which is Lot 4 in Hunters Crossing. So on that diagram that you saw, we're on the southernmost edge of Hunters Crossing. And I also printed out a photo just to put some context to it. And I'm also the one that submitted the video testimony. I don't know if everybody saw it or not, but I'm just going to make a brief statement based on what you may have already watched. But my... You want me to put it down here? Okay. Thank you. So my property, our property, southeast corner is about right here. I'm not a great golfer, but if I had a solid wedge, I'd hit his event center right there. And my wife and I, we purchased the lot last year, and we're currently building our home there. And when we were informed about this event center, it was something that we felt opposed to it because of its proximity. I mean, if you can think about how close you could hit a golf shot from the backyard of your home, and to have a structure there that's going to be a party atmosphere, it's not something that we were envisioning when we purchased the property. It is a very serene environment, and that is why we wanted to move there. So we oppose the location of this event center because we don't want to see it, we don't want to hear it. And we're concerned about the environmental impact of a business there on the pond. It's a natural habitat for many wildlife, a watering hole for deer, fox, and coyotes. And there's a lot of birds, and we've even witnessed, our neighbors witnessed bald eagles. So you've heard Eugene and Laura's testimony that they're planning on, at least they told us that they're wanting to reduce their farming operations and that they expect to augment their income with this structure. And in considering that, my wife and I, after a lot of thought, feel like we could support it, but with conditions. And the condition is that we first ask the commission to take your time and to consider the environmental impact as I described. We don't know if there would be a negative impact, but we think it's worth investigating. This is a natural habitat that invites many of the same wildlife we see at the Baker wetlands. It's very unique. We're worried about party activities and how that might increase the potential for litter from all those people, and of course, you can imagine the noise. So assuming you want to go through with it, even after that consideration and possibly even a study, we're asking that the improvements that they described in that pond, that would be stipulated in their permit. We would like to make sure that that work does indeed get done. And then lastly, if again you're going to pursue this, the road that was described that would be extended from East 1500, it would be visible from our property. And so I'm asking that they simply move it to the south side of that tree line. And you can see it is this tree line right here. And we would like it to be on the south side of that so that we wouldn't see that traffic. That would, we think that would be a consideration, that would be considerate of them to do that for us.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
3 minutes. Anyone else?
I'm Sarah Dingus. I'm also an adjacent property owner in Hunter's Crossing. We have lot number 1 and lot number 2, and our home is on lot number 1. So we are most probably impacted by the traffic on 1500 Road. We don't have a view of where the event center would be though. However, I did have the opportunity to go to the Campbell's build site and did see that they have a direct view of where that road is going to be on the north side of that tree line from their bedroom window. So it is a clear view from inside their home to where that road would be, and so it would be disruptive to their view, certainly. That said, it looks like a very nice project, and we understand the need for it in Douglas County. My husband and I certainly prefer this type of project to some alternatives that could occur on this land, such as subdividing it into residential lots. So we do support it, but we would love it if the Georges would be considerate to the adjacent property owners who are most impacted, especially by the view of the property. I think that would be an excellent adjustment. I'm also concerned about the noise. I understand that the outdoor amplified music is limited to 9 p.m. I would like an adjustment that limits it to a certain number of hours per day, such as a maximum of 4 hours, so that we're not dealing with outdoor concerts or things like that. If this is going to be a wedding venue primarily, then I think a limit to the number of hours per day is reasonable. And would sort of restrict it to being really, really noisy all day long or having multi-day events there. But that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Any further public comment?
My name's Patrick Alton. My wife and I, Erin, have 25 acres joining the Georges. And we see it as detrimental to our property values. Everything was zoned agricultural. We bought and planned on developing 35 acres. We've currently developed 15 acres, 3 houses on 15 acres. The adjacent property that Georges have already developed into lots is on 3 acres. So that's on our west border at this point. So I brought some paperclip copies. I'm sorry I didn't bring enough for everybody, but I'm going to hit the high points of that. We feel that this event center is a commercial endeavor and that it would take rezoning to make this work. It's a full-time commercial business. 7 days a week is what they're looking at. The agritourism portion of it, we don't completely understand. After briefing through some of the agritourism requirements, we're not seeing that this meets all of those. Again, we see it turning into a potential for commercial and then ultimately industrial zoning. The conditional use, we don't fully understand either without changing zoning. It exceeds our building side parking limitations, exceeds noise limitations, activity limitations, will allow others than agri owner to operate within. Zoning and land uses, the proposed property is zoned agricultural, and the proposal would completely change that zoning. Most of the area remains full agricultural with a smaller percentage of rural residential / agricultural acreages. Many farms, ranchettes located predominantly in the UGA limits. Even the land within the UGA is still predominantly complete agriculture and the remaining being rural residential and ag use. It was noted that previously by Sandy that it was purported to be in the UGA, and it is not. Our back property line is that borderline. Again, it's a commercial building with commercial operations, 7 days a week, night and day. Our property overlooks their pond from an elevated distance. So now the 20 acres that we have waited to develop is now in jeopardy of not maintaining the property values and the use that we would like to see as far as what Georges have utilized as well into rural residential lots. So there's a comment on there in the plan that denial of the application would prohibit the development of the event center. The property owner has other development options for the property but would not be able to pursue this project. So the denial would benefit the public health, safety, and welfare only if negative impacts were identified with the project. As conditions applied to the conditional use permit and the design and facility should minimize negative impacts. There would be no benefit to the public health, safety, and welfare for the denial of the project. So I appreciate your consideration in this.
Thank you, Mr. Helpin. Any additional public comment?
My name is Greg Dick. My wife Beverly and I own 2 lots in Hunter's Crossing that we bought from Eugene's development and we're presently building a house on one of the lots. We are basically right across from Craig Campbell that spoke earlier. And really our concern, I mean, we would never fault anybody for trying to start a business and make money off a business. I'm all for them. Our only concerns are basically noise and the amount of traffic that is going to be generated in certain events that are going to be out there. And we're basically just one road to the north of this project. And we would also agree that what Craig suggested was the road go in as far south as possible into that event center, and that would keep some of the traffic and farther away from our lots and everything. We bought those lots out there, I mean, basically to live out in the country but not have a whole bunch of noise and confusion and all that stuff like you do maybe in town. And so we just don't want to jeopardize that with this project. And I think if the project's done like it's been shown and that building's built like that, I mean, I think it would be a nice building. I mean, if we can just manage the noise and the traffic that it's going to generate out there.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Tony Ewart. My wife and I purchased Lot 5 in April of this year. For the past 27 years or so, we've lived in rural Douglas County, south of Lawrence. We're about, right now, 3 miles as the crow flies, about straight west on approximately 80 acres there. So we purchased Lot 5 in anticipation of building our retirement home there in a few years. Certainly, we willingly signed the restrictions and covenants that controlled the Hunters Crossing development, since those are intended to protect all the homeowners and the integrity of the living environment. We probably would not have made this purchase had we known that an event center of the size and scope that is being proposed is being planned. The lot that we purchased borders on the event center property line. We're right to the east of the Campbell property. And we believe that lot's going to bear a significant portion of the light and sound intrusion of an active event center. So I think the light issue is much easier to mitigate with trees and the lighting elements and design that are out there now. Noise mitigation is much more difficult in this situation. We're certainly not opposed to an enterprise such as this or business concepts such as the event center being proposed, but don't think it's appropriate to be built this close to a peaceful rural housing development that's been created there. Additionally, we question the wisdom of servicing an event center of this size and scope with a septic and lateral field system. It seems like a lot of utilization for that type of a sewage treatment system, and certainly a failure in that would not be a pleasant occurrence for anybody. So for those reasons, we're opposed to the approval of the CUP.
Thank you. Any additional public comment?
Good evening, my name is Paul Ohlert. My wife and I own Lot 6 in Hunters Crossing. Certainly we have a concern with the effect of our property value, but can I ask you a question?
If you asked a question to us, we can ask that when we get to our part.
Okay, well, there's been mention of 4 acres for the event center. There's been mention of 9 acres for the event center, but it's also on 80 acres. Does that mean that nothing else can happen with that 80 acres ever?
We'll clarify that.
Okay, because we assumed, and I'll just be honest with you, we assumed when we bought the lot that Eugene and Laura would, when all of those lots got sold, they would continue to develop the next 80 acres. But if we're gonna have an event center and more lots, that's a whole different deal. You know, so now we're dealing with a lot more than just the event center, if that can happen. Does that make sense? Okay, that's all I got.
Thank you. Any additional public comment? All right, seeing none, would the applicant like to respond to your neighbors?
Yes, I would. Okay, I got another letter to read for someone that's not bothered by it. She's a real estate agent. She lives in the neighborhood, owns the ground right next, probably within 2,000 feet of the event center.
All right, this is more your first part. Right now, we're asking you to come up to respond to the comments that were made by the other people that just spoke. Do you have
Well,
any
I'm
response?
getting to the property values.
All right.
Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
As a real estate agent, contiguous landowner, and nearby resident, it is my pleasure to write this letter in support of the proposed event center. It is my understanding that our neighboring property owners have expressed some concern, impact on property values. My professional opinion is that the event center will have no bearing or negative impact on my property values. Concern of noise, the proposed event center is near the First Church of Nazarene and the Veritas football field, which also holds regular events. These events from the comfort of my home can seldom be heard. Therefore, the concern of the noise at the event center is not a concerning factor in mine. I fully support the proposed event center. The event center is gonna be a new building with insulation that most activities will be inside, except for weddings outside, which is not a blaring noise. It's just a.
That wouldn't be amplified music. The only amplified music, which I don't even know that would really, I suppose it's amplified, but if it's indoors, you still want people to be able to communicate, and I don't think it'll be like a concert type thing. Weddings outside, yes, they might have music walking down the aisle. This plans on being some benches in the grass. If you can afford to put in a patio down the road, maybe, but it won't be that there'll be amplified or bands or music at all set up outside. So as far as the music or noise, mostly will be contained. I can't say that there won't be people in the parking lot that visit or talk or whatever, but I think as far as a wedding, that's usually pretty low key. As far as some of the things I wrote down, I think we will put a sign up that will directly divert and to keep people from going into the Hunters Crossing development. We will make it very clear. We own the property at the corner, so a big sign will be put up there, however many miles. There'll be a big sign outside. That's something that we will, divert traffic from there.
And also on traffic, you come in from the south too, and the north. So that don't mean if there's 150 people, usually three people per car, so you count 50 cars, maybe 20 of them come from the south and 40 of them come from the north or whatever, They won't necessarily all come from the same direction.
I also don't expect it to be a 7-day event center.
No.
I can't work that hard. I mean, I work in town, but this will be family ran, not sold to a corporation. And as far as the development, this is something we want to do for our retirement. It's not something that we want to build an event center and then put a bunch of houses around it.
No.
And we don't plan, there's no concert type thing will be ever. I don't want that in my yard. I'm the one that's gonna be monitoring this day and night, so I'm not gonna be having rock
And
concerts.
we want to get along with our neighbors.
Yeah, I do. I don't wanna, and as far as the environment, I wouldn't want it to disturb anybody. I understand living out in the country. I know what it's, I want it quiet too, but I also want people to see the beauty of it and
All
enjoy
right,
it.
thank you very much. I'm sure there'll be some questions from the commissioner. All right, at that time, we'll bring it back up to the commission for any questions or comments. Anybody that'd like to start? One of our quiet people, maybe?
I'll start. I'm just curious about the road that was brought up, that is currently planned for the north side of the tree line. Is there a specific reason for that location of the road, north of the tree line as opposed to south of the tree
The
line?
reason, well, really, I already kind of got a road there, just a field entrance. The view of the pond coming down to it, but I wouldn't be opposed to moving it to the other side. Because I got to thinking after talking to Craig Campbell, it'd be good for like blowing for snow, blocking snow, then cedar trees go down there. That'd be good for that and a little bit of dust control too. So I would not be opposed to moving the driveway to the other side of the trees.
Commissioner Butler.
Mr. George, if you'll stay up there for just a second. On the aerial view of your property, it looks, the entire pond is on your property, correct?
Yeah, well, when we fix it and gets full, see, right there is probably a March or April after all the rains.
Okay,
It's getting pretty close to Campbell's property, and when I fix it and get it full, part of it will go on Campbell's property, the very tail of it, Mr. Campbell's property.
okay, and your house is located out there
Top
as well,
right
correct?
corner, you can see part of my barns there.
Okay. And your wife had said the only music is going to be inside of the facility, correct?
Yeah.
Other than someone
Other
walking
than
down the
wedding-
aisle?
Wedding, talking, at the wedding deal, be the only
Okay.
thing. Any, like the dance, like the reception, will all be inside and the door's shut.
Okay,
Well,
well, but there's not gonna be,
but it'll be shut by 9 o'clock, like I
Okay.
said in
There
the
won't be amplified
application.
music.
okay. And then I did have another question, Mr. Chairman. There were a couple, Mr. Halpin and Mr. Ollert, it looks like you guys had referenced impacts that the proposed development would have on your property values. What information do you have to support how it would affect it or not affect it?
The only information I have to support that is if I were to build a house at that, on that corner that overlooks this proposed area, now I'm gonna be looking at an event center. And it's not limited, in the verbiage here, it is not limited to no outside music. It's, and God forbid, 2 years after they do this, they die, it goes up for sale. So then what?
So if there was if there was a restriction on outdoor music, what, would that change your opinion?
Not at all. The viewpoint from my property down onto this overlooks it. The drainage from my property fills their pond. This to me is an infringement on my viability as far as the property values that I foresee after building homes for a living for a while.
Okay.
This is not something I would move to the country to view.
Any additional questions, comments? Commissioner Sands?
Question for the applicant, Mr. George. This is just for I've shot out at Cedar Hill Gun Club before. Can you hear that?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay, thank you.
that's some more noise out there. And also, I want to reiterate, most of the water that fills that pond comes from the west.
Sandy, could you come up and just explain what area we're talking about and what a conditional use permit is and what area would be affected by this?
I am happy to do that. Okay, to start with, a conditional use permit is a use that is permitted, in this case, in the county, subject to a public hearing by this body and ultimately approved by the county commission. So there are some discretionary components to a conditional use permit. It does not change the base zoning district. The agricultural zoning will remain and be retained. A conditional use permit also can, first of all, you have to be one of the uses that is conditionally approved. So if you look in the county zoning code, there are a number of uses that are permitted in the agricultural area subject to a conditional use permit. Reception facility such as this is one of those uses. You can condition a conditional use permit and things like hours of operation, lighting, parking, access, all of those elements are something that are discretionary within the project. The other thing that a conditional use permit can do is limit the intensity of the development on the property so that the use is specific to, or the activity is specific to the area that's identified in the site plan component of the project. So if the applicant is proposing the building in this location, that doesn't give them license to go build a building here.
We're still seeing the picture from the Elmo.
Oh my gosh, I am so sorry.
So maybe we could switch that over. Thank you. I'm sorry.
There we go. So, as I was mentioning, so the conditional use permit is specific to the site plan component of this that articulates where the use is going to be located, what kind of buffering or screening, what kind of parking. The commission could articulate that more parking be provided, for instance, for particular use. I think Mary's assessment was that the parking was kind of right-sized with some overflow parking for this. The point is, so the overall acreage, the parent parcel, if you will, is 80 acres, and that's what we do all of our notice boundaries from, is the property as a whole. But the actual activity area that is proposed with this project is limited to the area shown on the site plan and the access driveway that connects it to the public road. And then the discussion that's been going on is about locating this driveway instead of on the north side of this existing tree line. I think relocating it perhaps to the south side of the existing tree row. But it is specific to this area. So when you're looking at the total acreage, and I apologize because I don't know those numbers off the top of my head, whether it's 4 acres or 9 acres, I believe Mary described 9 acres in her staff report. That would include the building, the parking, probably the terrace outdoor areas, and probably the driveway probably accounts for that 4 to 9 acre number that's coming in. But it doesn't give it license to have the building here and then build patio and gardens out here or up in here. So does that help explain that?
Yes, thank you.
Actually, before, can I have a question?
Commissioner
before you
Ashford.
step away? The applicant has stated that this is for wedding receptions, and you mentioned a reception area. So as part of the conditional use permit, are those restrictions something that we discuss as opposed to saying it could be open for rock concerts?
You could add a condition that says outdoor music festivals would also be a prohibited activity associated with this. Wedding receptions are the things that we think of most typically for this kind of, but you can have receptions, family reunions, graduation parties, retirement parties. You can have an employee retreat event. So there's a wide range of different activities. But if you wanted to specifically prohibit something like a music festival, and I think that's probably pretty clear in everybody's mind. I don't think you'd have to spend a lot of time defining what that is. Outdoor music festival is probably pretty explicit if you wanted to add that as a restriction to the activities.
Before you leave, there's no recommendation for a time limit for a review on this conditional use permit?
I don't recall that in the recommendations. That's something, that's another condition you could add to this project. That, for instance, that the project be reviewed every 5 years with a new conditional use permit every 10 years or something along those lines, if you feel that's necessary.
Okay.
Is it an administrative review by staff, or we're looking at compliance? Is it a review that comes back to the Board of County Commissioners? Is it a full review that comes back to the Planning Commission with notice to the public and then on to the Planning Commission? So it would be probably helpful if you articulated what your thought was on that.
And since I have you up there and I'm using you to educate our vast viewing audience, what about transfer of the conditional use permit to somebody who buys a property next week?
I think that's also a condition you could add, that this conditional use permit is specific to this location, to the applicant, and then the timing, and that if the owner-operator changes for whatever reason, either they're just wanting to put it under different management, then it would come back and require a new conditional use permit to make sure that the new management agency is properly operating it. Or if the property is sold to a completely different owner, then a new conditional use permit could be required. So those are conditions that could be added.
Just two more, just to cover this whole area. One, if there are complaints, there is a process to revoke a conditional use permit. Could you just briefly go through that?
That is correct. So that same process would be anyone from the public could contact the county zoning office and lodge a complaint against any conditional use permit. County would then look at trying to either bring that property into compliance. I can't think of an instance where a conditional use has been completely revoked, but if there is no resolution and you can't get that property owner to come into compliance, then the county would probably initiate the process to revoke the conditional use permit. It would be the reverse of exactly what we're doing here. It would be notice to property owners, public hearing to revoke it and then close it out. And then the use would have to desist.
And finally, to address a concern about the use expanding, anything that goes outside what's specific to this site plan would require to go through an entirely new process. Is that correct?
If you state your approval in that manner, yes, that would probably be, and I didn't spend a lot of time looking at the site plan before this meeting, and perhaps I should have. It might be helpful if a specific area were delineated on the plan that puts the limits of what the exterior area is. So it's a known fixed point, and then if there's complaints or if the business grows in a manner that they want to expand, then yes, the conditional use permit would need to come back for a public hearing.
Thank you. What to, Commissioner Sinclair?
Could I ask you some questions too, Sandy?
Mary owes me.
Is there her project? That's just so bad.
This is your oral defense.
Did the notes cover any of these questions?
No.
She owes you lunch.
In the zoning regs or otherwise, is there any requirement that someone obtain an environmental impact statement for a CUP?
That is not a requirement.
Okay.
Anything like that would be above and beyond any kind of requirement that's in the code today.
Okay, Mr. George talked a little bit about repairs that he was planning to make to the pond. Were those required as part of the process of obtaining a CUP?
They were not.
Okay. And then can you kind of explain what the process is for someone deciding what kind of sewer or septic system to put in their property, depending on what the use is or the facilities are?
So the sanitary code is a code that's in the county regulations, and it's governed and managed by Douglas County Health Department. So a user would need to apply for a building permit, but they're also applying for that on-site sewage disposal system permit as well. And it's been a very long time since I've done county work about septic systems, but they generally have to be engineered and designed for the use. So a facility like this probably has some peak usage compared to a residence which has daily usage. So those systems are designed a little bit differently. There are requirements about where you put those lateral fields, how far from ponds and improvements. There's quite a bit of design criteria that goes into that, and they do have to be specifically designed for the use. And then the county sanitarian is the one who is also looking at that, as well as building permits.
So to the extent a septic and system with lateral fields were installed, it would be with the county approval?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Commissioner Sanders.
While we're on that subject, this layout clearly doesn't show that, but I would assume that those lateral fields would probably be adjacent to the parking lot? Maybe someone who's a little bit more familiar with lateral fields in the...
You would probably not want to put your lateral field underneath where your overflow parking is going to be, because crushing your pipe is going to destroy and damage your system. So it's going to need to be in a protected...
So it's have to be close to the pond then?
I don't know
Okay.
exactly. I mean, because there is some topography that goes along with that, how that system is designed.
I wasn't suggesting someone should park on a lateral field, by the
No,
way. I knew that part.
no,
It's
and
just-
that's
I'm glad you mentioned the topography, because as I look at it, everything slopes down into that pond.
right. And lateral fields typically are not tremendously deep because they use that evaporation process. So you want a good stand of grass and vegetation over those lateral fields.
I only have one other question, Mr. Chairman. On the, if assuming sometime in the future the property owner decided to parcel out the areas around the event center, what would they have to be looking at on the shared drive? Would the drive that's going in have to be used as a shared drive access point, or would there have to be county restrictions on access points?
I'm not sure that I can answer that quite. Mary would probably reel it off the top of her head. Depending on what category and classification of the road There are some requirements about how that would look, whether or not that land development would require maybe a new road,
Right.
an actual county road. This
Yeah.
is a driveway, this
Yeah.
is not a road. A new road to come in to serve those lots, depending on what that lot layout arrangement could be. Since this is outside of the urban growth area, it would be part of that certificate of survey. So there's gonna be acreage requirements as well as frontage requirements to meet, to be able to do it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I have one. Under the current site plan that's been bandied about, does it extend up to the shore of the pond at all? Because if people are out there for an event, people are going to be walking up to that pond. I mean, without any doubt, people are going to go visit the pond. So I'm just wondering if that's included in the area that we're talking about?
I think that would be maybe one of, and I apologize, it was not one of the things Mary and I talked about before her tournament, whether or not there in the site plan is delineated an outdoor area. I could imagine this could be a very scenic view, a very attractive view, maybe for photographs or bench seating, or I don't know, I mean, you can envision a lot of things. So it could be, you could add a condition that says to define the limits of the outdoor use area associated with this project.
Thanks. I just wanted to be sure, because I didn't want to, if the conversation ended up going in a way of delineating the area, I didn't want to knock off something that people are going to be in anyway. So, okay, thank you.
Sure. Anything else?
Any other questions or comments?
For the applicant?
Commissioner Weaver,
I have a question for the applicant.
the applicant come up.
Mr. George, one of the improvements you're talking about to do with the pond,
Excuse me?
the maintenance or improvements you're wanting to do with
Yeah.
the pond, what do they consist of?
Mainly it is to fix the leak and then clean about a third of the pond out, get it deeper, it's a little silted in, so fish could have oxygen to survive, to keep the moss and the algae down, so it's a pretty view for picture taking, like she said, and just for the venue to work, you gotta have a pretty pond, or right now, no one's booked nothing right now with the way that pond looks. And it's terrible on wildlife too, you know.
Well, you're absolutely right, it's an extremely expensive proposition to dredge a pond out, and I'm sure you're.
What's that now?
Say cleaning a pond out is really expensive. You
Yeah.
haven't had some experience with that.
I'm not cleaning the whole pond out.
Well, whatever you've got to dredge out, you've got material to dispose of,
Yeah.
for one thing.
Yeah,
The pond pipe replacement doesn't concern me much, that's done all the time.
yeah.
And they're pretty relatively inexpensive to do based on the value of the pond. But
Maybe you could tell me, I had 30,000 in my mind, spending on the pond.
I'd hesitate to know without knowing how much area you're gonna do, but the
Yeah.
pipe wouldn't be anywhere near that.
What's that?
The pipe replacement itself should be nowhere near.
No, and that's, yeah, I know that, yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments? Commissioner Sinclair.
Mr. George, can I ask you a question? Sorry.
It's all right.
Sorry about letting you sit down. Just real quickly, I don't know if your presentation sort of presupposed this, but have there been complaints or any sorts of disputes with neighbors about the condition of the pond?
No.
Okay.
I just met with one neighbor and told him what I was gonna do, because the
Okay.
pond is bad, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Is there any-
You have something?
Oh, I think he was wanting to sit down, but he didn't know if he should.
No, we play musical chairs. Any other comments, motions, suggestions on how to proceed? Commissioner Willie.
It's hard to stay on the farm, and it takes a lot of creativity, and it takes thinking outside the box, and this is one of the options that we've kind of embraced and said, you know, this agritourism, which it is kind of strange that event center falls under agritourism. I looked into that a while ago when one was coming in near me, and it took me a while to kind of convince me that, yes, that is agritourism, and more so possibly on your place, because it's actively used. It's always hard for neighbors to see something change, especially when we're so attached to our viewscape, especially in rural neighborhoods. But this is a way to possibly keep that in more of an agricultural use for a longer period of time, and to keep a farm family on the farm, and I'm in favor of it. I'm the first to say that, I guess, up here, but I think that maybe the additional noise restriction, which didn't sound like you were worried about that, if we say no outdoor music festivals or something like that in the document, is that correct, Mrs. George? So I think that this can be a good neighbor, and I think it'll take some getting used to because it's a change, but I think it's probably going to work out, especially if you can kind of keep in communication with one another.
Anyone else?
Just in terms of some starting in on conditions, I appreciate the applicant's willingness to maybe move that road just to the south of the tree line to help with that particular concern.
Question, Scott. The staff recommendation number 1, I'm a little confused on how, is there a suggested change in wording to that because of changing what's in key point number 1, that we're adjacent to the urban growth area and not?
I think we were recommending to strike that. Just strike it completely.
Okay. So we have, where are we? So we're talking now about any other conditions. So we're on outdoor amplified music. I'm talking about that noise right now. Do we want to make any changes to recommendation number 4?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, what may help the music festival and everything, and also may match what you heard testimony from the applicant, would be to prevent outdoor amplified music completely, just prohibit outdoor amplified music. That would leave open the string quartet that, if there's an outdoor component of a wedding, but maintain any amplified music in the building itself.
Okay.
As it's worded right now, it's allowed outside, but ceases at 9 p.m.
Would that then mean that only live music outside, or is that maybe is too much of a restriction
Well,
for a wedding ceremony?
No, amplified meaning live amplified music would be amplified as well, but what wouldn't count as amplified is an unamplified guitar or violin or those kinds of music, thank you.
But something
Acoustic instruments,
played on speakers,
but not
even
played
if it
on
were
any
quiet?
speakers or any
Okay.
amplification.
seems like
And
maybe
I was just
more of a
thinking of-
restriction than needed.
And that's a decision of the commission,
Right.
but it matches what you heard in terms of how the applicant intends to operate and manage the property as well, and maybe addresses some of the neighborhood issues.
Yeah, that would prohibit recorded music being used when you aren't hiring an acoustic group or chamber group.
Yeah, if I may, I did note the comments from the applicant about they didn't desire to have any outdoor amplified music. Outdoor acoustic music is really, really quiet. And that, if you absolutely don't think you're gonna have any outdoor music being played, at least electrically, some sort of prohibition or prevention might be necessary.
Well, I think the testimony was that it would be if someone's walking down the aisle, like that kind of music would be played, but no concert type music.
I'm not saying that they might not have a speaker.
Right.
Can you come up to the
Yeah, sure,
podium,
thanks.
please?
I'm not saying that there might not be a speaker, because, I don't know, a lot of times you hear music that's recorded music, and it's gonna have to be on a speaker. But I don't mean that it's gonna be amplified like with amps and banging.
Right.
And it would just be during the ceremonies. It's not, I don't know, we
I
plan on doing
understand.
celebration of life and just, anything like that. I'm not saying that there may not be music, but I will not allow amplified banging,
Right.
really loud music.
Thank you. Yeah, that's kind of what I was asking. And that seems reasonable to me. I don't know how we codify that exactly in this, but I think Scott was on the right track there.
think it could be framed with the exception of the ceremony itself or the memorial service, if that's those types of things, give some examples that any outdoor amplified music is prohibited, something around those words.
Music walking down the aisle would be ceremonial. Music played at the reception is not,
Right.
for instance.
Give some examples in our condition.
Want to try to write the condition?
I guess, I don't know what one of the questions I asked was about the gun range. It's less than a mile away as the crow flies, and the reason I brought that up is because decibel-wise, a shotgun blast is significantly louder than even amplified music. And so I don't know that the risk of noise pollution is necessarily there with amplified music during daytime hours.
Could I add to that, I know the FOP site out by Lone Star Lake had quite opposition from neighbors, and that includes submachine guns, helicopter landings, and everything else. That's where they do all their training sometimes. So I agree, I mean, sometimes there's going to be noise, and it does carry farther out in the country, and especially across water. But I think we're looking at minimizing that here, so appreciate that. I do appreciate the dark sky requirements for the lighting. I think I'd sure like to see more of that come into place. I know we don't have that codified in any of our ordinances yet, but the more people that can be encouraged to go that way, I think the better for as things move out towards the country. So who wants to take a stab at what conditions we have now that would go into a motion?
Well, if we're not changing number 4, then, and we're striking number 1, then that would, sounds like that's everything we have there. I'm not, I guess, whether we want to take a stab at codifying some sort of restriction on outdoor amplified music in particular, I don't think that's the intent here, but, I'm not sure.
Could it just be limited in duration and never after a certain time? I mean,
We did have that suggestion from Ms. Dingus about reducing the number of hours that it could be. And it sounded like if we're talking about, I'm sorry, if we were talking about during a ceremony or during some kind of ceremonial something, probably, a couple of hours would be sufficient for that. 2 hours, does that sound reasonable?
just add like no more than, nothing in excess of 2-hour periods
Per
to
day.
end at the absolute time of, what is it? 9 PM.
And no music festivals.
And no what?
And no music festivals.
No music.
Even short
festivals.
ones.
Not even short ones.
No big stages and, okay. Anyone else? Motion?
I move that we recommend forwarding the conditional use permit for a recreational facility to the Board of County Commissioners with a recommendation for approval based on the findings of fact found in the body of the staff report and subject to the conditions listed therein, with striking number 1. Number 4 will be modified to say not less than 2 hours, or not more than 2 hours, and it shall cease at 9 PM. No outdoor music festivals. And did we want to, well, I will include moving the road to the south of the tree line.
I have a second. Second by Commissioner Struckoff. Any further discussion? Comments? Commissioner
Can I just make a
Sinclair.
quick comment? I just wanted to acknowledge the neighbors that referenced concerns over property values. I understand what you're getting at, having being a property owner and having developments near me. For our purposes, though, that's a tough consideration when we don't have analysis or evaluation or something like that from someone that's an expert in that field, like an appraiser or something like that. And so our goals are always to try to make sure we get the restrictions right on a CUP like this so that we can kind of mitigate the impacts that will be felt by owners, even though it may not address your concerns in terms of value. But every property owner has rights with what they do to their property, and so we just kind of have to try to figure out ways to make it work. And so I just wanted to thank you for your comments and let you know that it's just not something that we can really jump on without more expert opinions on that.
Thank you. Anything else? All right. All those in favor of the motion as presented, please signify. Passes 8-0. And Mr. Halpin, your letter will be included in the packet that goes on forwarded to the county commission, and everybody has the opportunity to voice their opinion when this comes up to the county commission again, and write any additional letters you want. Thank you. Anything? So we have one more item on the agenda. It's a miscellaneous item to talk about the date for our 2019 Planning Commission orientation.
Mr. Crick is going to walk us through this quickly.
Looks to be the date that seems to fit with most people's calendars. I just want to kind of see if that's still the case, and if so, we start proceeding down that line. The second most acceptable one was September 20th. We had a couple more unavailables on that date than we did on October 18th.
Any objection really to October 18th?
I like the 18th.
Unless, I mean, I'm one of the ones that can't be here on September 20th, but somebody can certainly take over for me for the day.
What was the other day, October 18th or what?
September 20th.
Looks good.
Sure.
Okay, October 18th, it looks like we've got. And we started at our agenda meeting, Mr. Carter and Jeff and Scott and I started talking about some potential topics. So Jeff, you're the master of keeping the lists. Where were we in that discussion?
Brought up were to discuss, kind of discussing the philosophy and the policy of planning in the city of Lawrence and Douglas County, kind of going through some of those items, talking through the interaction that you see between the city, the county, and the universities and some of those details, and also just kind of introducing some of our general items that we tend to see in orientation about golden criteria, your COMA and your CORA trainings for your meeting items. And we also have the subcommittee who's been duly nominated, who can also help guide us on that day and those topics.
Okay. Want to have anything that they desperately want to hear about that day?
All of it.
If you do.
Mhm. Just in turn, I've heard a couple mentions, even at the city commission, talking about planning priorities. So I'd like to have a discussion about, that's a whole separate thing, okay.
That you'll see formally after Plan 2040 gets adopted.
Okay. Anything else? Shall we adjourn?
Yes.
All right, we are adjourned.